Welcome everyone to another episode of Research Ethics Conversations. I'm Hakan from University College London, and I'm very excited to be joined today by Eileen Kennedy. Eileen is a professor at the Institute of Education, Department of Culture, Communication and Media at the University of College London, and her research explores the transformative potential of online learning with a particular focus on communities on the move, such as refugee communities in Lebanon. And she's also deeply involved in education, capacity building projects for refugees, using technology for providing education for all. And such an important and timely topic, really. Thank you for being here, Eileen.
Thank you for inviting me.
Eileen, thanks very much again for your time. So we are going to talk about ethics in your research setting, of course, and in a minute. But could you share a bit more about your current research project and what's been driving your focus on these areas recently?
Yeah, I'd say that my research focuses learning co-design research, and I do that, as you say, often with communities that are affected by mass displacement, but not exclusively. But what I'm kind of interested in to make sure that people have access to education, and one of the ways that we found that you could really make a difference to help people is to support teachers, because in every context that faces displacement, that you don't have enough teachers, or teachers come into an environment where you that they're unfamiliar with, that they're dealing with children that have, missed out on school, or maybe they're traumatized, and there's lots and lots of challenges for teachers, and so to support those teachers and provide them with ideas, and but also sort of helping them to understand their role maybe a bit better is potentially really valuable. And it's precisely those kinds of communities you can reach with online learning, and so we've done a lot of research creating teacher professional development with those teacher communities themselves. And I think that co-design thing is critical to what I do. But I don't just do it. I mean, I've expanded this sort of idea of co-design in lots of other contexts as well.
Right. Well, I mean, just listening to you, that's really, really fascinating. And it's, again, so timely, but that's also quite a complex setting, isn't it? I mean, there are so many aspects that you have to consider simultaneously as a researcher. And, you're working with teachers, probably many of those are coming from refugee background, and dealing with things that are really life-threatening on their everyday basis, and focusing on something else, which is extremely important, such as education, may or may not be the first priority in some the aspects. So, and there are again other aspects as well, such as human rights issues going on in that context. I'm just thinking about the region at the moment and an unfortunate situation all the countries and societies involved within that space. There is also the issues about technology, digital technology, and as soon as the digital is being incorporated, the issues of privacy comes into the picture as well. The privacy, consent, sort of issues of safety. So at the same time, I think when we consider all these aspects together, intersection of those things create a further unpredictable environment for any researcher doing something within that context. So how you as a researcher tackling such a slippery, fluid environment, tackling the issues of ethics in your research concept? What are the 2-3 most challenging issues that you come across in your everyday basis in this context?
Well, one thing that adds to that complexity that you just highlighted there, Hakan, is also understand when you do kind of research that is to do with designing learning, then it's not that clear what the difference is between creating an educational product and doing research. And I think that's really been a complication in terms of ethics as well. So, for instance, I think one of the biggest things is about consent, and protecting the identity of participants, because there's lots of situations where it could be dangerous for people to be identified. And so that's really difficult. And yet, of course, people are often quite keen to work on these projects, or they see that it's important. And so I think that the sort of ethics that the ethical processes that you might ordinarily follow usually don't have all of that mess going on around them. I mean, maybe we should actually think of these things as, but because they seem a bit more straightforward. It's like, do you understand this? Are you agreeing? But there could be all sorts of ramifications. So one of the things, and also this idea of what if somebody actually wants to reveal their identity? I mean, a lot of our ethics processes are based on the idea that we shouldn't be revealing the identity of our participants. But when you're doing co-design research, what you're saying is that this is not just me. This is this is a partnership, and we're creating things together, and so that the ownership is shared, and often people do want to. They don't mind being identified, and yet we sort of have to do it anyway, because otherwise we won't be able to get through the ethics process. We won't be able to get published and things like that. So I think that that's another complication. And as I say, because it's co-design, I mean, one of the ethical challenges I think that I'm going to face quite soon is that we're taking a kind of citizen science approach to collecting data. So we've co-designed a lot of courses, and I mean, this is in not necessarily. Well, I mean, I think we'd hopefully do that in Lebanon, but in another context as well. But what we want to find out, not just that have teachers engaged with these courses and learned things. I mean, you can sort of find that out from looking at the courses themselves. But what we want to know is whether they've been able to apply that learning in their practice, and whether it's had any impact on, the children they teach and things like that. And it's quite difficult to get access to that kind of data for obvious reasons. So what we're trying to do is now ask the teachers themselves to be the researchers within their classrooms. And I think that then raises an ethical issue, doesn't it? Because it's that they're not academic researchers in the way in which we are, but then they're very close to the community, and one of the strengths of them being there and conducting the research is that the participants or will trust them because they are from the community. So I'm going to have to find a way of I suppose demonstrating that we can support their learning about the research and ethics process, so that we can trust them to collect data in ethical ways.
Yeah.
Too, but these are quite big things.
These are huge questions, and very often there might not be one single answer that can be applied in every context, and you need to find that answer in the field usually. Yes. And that's quite challenging often because of this unpredictability, because of not exactly knowing what's going to come next. In the sort of tomorrow is another setting, another context. So you reminded me some of the research that I happen to be the part of in the refugee camps, for instance, where everybody knows each other, where the concepts of sort of the safe space become quite problematic too, exactly because and again the issues of safety, because everybody will know who's participating, who's sharing what kind of knowledge within that space. It's very difficult to provide that fully safe space for the participants and the co-designers too. So my question is, for instance, you have mentioned that very often you come across issues that the participants may wish to be acknowledged, which is absolutely understandable, of course, because they are putting their efforts, their time, they would like to be the part of it with their name and whatever the contribution that they've made. But for instance, in a case like that, when you're talking about and giving an information about the research and potential risks before the research takes place, before the data is collected, we all do that, before everything else starts. If you know that the sort of disclosing the identifiable information of your collaborators, of your participators, might be, quite dangerous, even if there is no direct sort of risk that can be identifiable, but there might be in the future. How do you handle that? How do you advise the participants to take that sort of safety measures when it comes to the consent? Do you still go ahead with what they would like to prefer in terms of sharing their names and all the identifiable information, or do you say the final word and then keep everything anonymous? How do you tackle that issue? There might not be, again, one single answer for this. It's maybe depending on the context, but I'm just curious about your strategy.
Very interesting questions, and I think it's different in different circumstances. But one of the things that I feel quite passionate about with regard to acknowledging the process of research is about building relationships, which often is not seen as research. It's sort of it's sort of stuff you do before you do the research, but in these kinds of circumstances, you can't really work in a context like the ones we're discussing without having developed really strong trustworthy relationships with trusting, I suppose, relationships with the communities. And then you can so that people have to know that that it's you want to support them rather than that you're going to try to take something away. But I think that during that process, then you can get to know other people that know the context maybe better than you, and then you can take advice from them, and you can go through those people to make sure that people understand what's going on. So, for instance, people might be worried about signing something if they thought that it could lead to negative consequences for themselves, and the people that you're working with can maybe reassure them, or we could just find a way around that, or maybe and thinking about different. Not everything has to be research data. Some things can be, we can take contributions to the cause. I mean, we've videoed people and obscured their identity, for instance. There's all sorts of things that you could do. And I think it is just it's that sensitivity, but also not making the decisions outside of the context, like make it help, and making sure that people know. One of the things that recently on this topic is that we do a lot of research through workshops, co-design workshops. So that really would be a way of documenting the process of co-design to show where all of this stuff comes from. And we get consent for people, that they're attending the workshops, and they, their contributions might be recorded in some ways, used in our research. And, when you're presenting your research to other people, they really like to see photographs of workshops. Somehow that brings it to life for people. And I think that's, if you want to, I mean, I believe firmly in what we're doing is a good thing. So you kind of do want to present your research in a way that people can, that can understand, that to bring it to life for people to bring people on board, essentially. And so those photographs are quite important. But then, we even though people have given permission to have photographs taken, for instance, we often go that's an extra step of obscuring faces, in which you can, with digital tools like in PowerPoint, there's artistic effects, I think it's called, for images. There you can really easily obscure people's identity, and that's been really, really helpful, so that we don't have to take any extra risks, but we can show people the kind of things that we were doing. So I think that it's like just thinking about it, taking it seriously, and going beyond what an ethical process might stipulate, and to to sort of apply it to the sensitivities of the context that you're working in.
That's very true. Well, these are really, really great advice. Thank you so much. I mean, when I think about those tips that you've just mentioned, I think one thing that really I found extremely useful, I mean, among all the other things, is that you were mentioning, when you were referring to the complexities that the researcher may not be always aware of, because we are not so much knowledgeable about every single detail in that particular context, for instance, that you have mentioned the importance of collaborating with people who might have insights, who might have experience and knowledge in that field in a way, and then co-designing things together. And then you also mentioned how difficult it is to strike a balance, because there's a very sort of delicate line in between, while collaborating people and at the same time ensuring their safety in a way. And those technologies are really helping actually, to make sure that everybody is safe and their identities are not disclosed at the same time. I want to bring you back to that aspect of co-designing things. Can you tell us a little bit more about how do you work with your participants when you are designing the project itself? How do you collaborate with them? How do you decide whom to collaborate with, for instance, before the research actually starts? And how do you base your sort of, the design of your project on the basis of the insights that were coming from the field itself when you're collaborating with the people?
So again, relationships and collaboration. So we have usually started with a small collaboration, that would lead onto involving more people, so that we go through the networks of our collaborators, and they will bring people in, and then we will work gradually to sort of share what we had in mind and what they're doing, and like to sort of think about whether or not there could be a joint project and whether it would be useful for them. And I think that, I don't know if is it an ethical thing? Maybe it is, that sort of idea that, I think the principle of co-design is to acknowledge that you don't know everything, and to listen to what other people know, and some, and to, so therefore, like, just build together, so that you can kind of think, well, I could contribute this, you could contribute that. I think there's all sorts of ethical issues actually that are around how you build something, like, if you create an online course of the nature of that we do, that it's an awful lot of work. I mean, really a lot of work, and of course you can't just go in. I mean, I think one of the things about co-design is that you might think ideally a co-design, a really good co-design relationship is where everything is co-produced. But what that can mean is that you're giving a lot of extra jobs to people that don't have any time, and that are not necessarily being rewarded for doing that. And you can't give people a lot of extra jobs, so it's about, I think you have to be sensitive about what you're asking people to do, and sort of to, make your, when you can be with people, make it as much as productive as it possibly can, so that people can contribute, but on their own terms, and that they're not feeling like under pressure to do more than they are prepared to do. So there's a lot of those kinds of decisions to make.
That's right. That's right. Actually, you're talking also about, that's a, actually good passage for the next question that was in my mind, talking about the, how to prepare your ethics application in the first place. And we usually rely on our previous experiences and then literature, of course, in the field. And we try to be as much comprehensive as possible before we are, when we are preparing our ethics applications, and we all get approval before our, the research starts from our institutions, of course. So let's focus a little bit on that in the remainder of the conversation today. It's been really, really wonderful, by the way. I wanted to hear from you, your experience of ethics application. So how did it go so far? I mean, did you find the review process? We have usually two reviewers looking at, blind reviewers looking at the applications and coming back with their comments, for instance. Did you find it helpful so far?
Well, I'm always daunted by ethics applications, to be fair, because of the complicated nature of what we're doing, that it's not kind of straightforward, that it seems like, we're trying to fit ourselves into a box, which is not really the right size. And so I worry about it. And in some ways, the kinds of things that we're constantly thinking about, which are ethical concerns, and I mean, the nature of whether or not this work is worth doing in the first place, is an ethical concern. And it's one that is constantly, I think, on our minds, and yet, what when you come to the part that highlights ethical issues, that's not really what they're going to be looking for. They're going to be looking for, like, have you got a consent form? Have you got, a participant information sheet, and so on. And so I don't know whether or not it's tricky, because you in a sense you kind of just you want to talk to that audience and maybe minimize a little bit what all of the things that will be going on in your project. But I mean, I think this is very helpful for me, because I'm kind of thinking that maybe I shouldn't do that quite so much, you know what I mean? And actually describe the complexities, because it takes a long time often, ethics processes. So you don't want to raise issues that, that are going to, delay everything and be kind of difficult for people to solve. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that
I
answers.
hear you. I hear you. Absolutely. I understand that. I mean, we are in the fields of social sciences. And again, the complexities are huge. And that's not really possible to fit them all, using your words, into that box that is quite limited. There are so many constraints of that. Everyday life is not like this. It's much more complex, as you said. It's much bigger and not really easy to, sort of list them up, so to speak, before the research starts. But let's think about a scenario. For instance, we still need to inform our participants about the potential ethical issues, potential sort of, the harm, potential benefits as well before we start. And then the research starts. Just imagine a situation that a couple of weeks later, everything's going well, but something else happened that is quite interesting and complex, and that was not really so much covered at the beginning before the research took place. For instance, how do you tackle that personally? What kind of strategy that you apply? Do you go back to the institution, for instance, to ask for advice, or is it your co-researchers that you search for advice? So how do you handle that situation? That was unpredictable, but it happened, and that was not really fully covered. Have you ever come across a situation like this, for instance?
I'm not sure exactly. I'm not sure exactly. I think, well, I mean, one of the, I suppose, okay, we have ethical approval to do research based on workshops. Our partners have said, well, the thing is that these forms and this participant research information sheet is very, very formal, and I think it's going to terrify people, or they're not really going to understand it. And so what we think we should do is to introduce it to them and to talk them through it, before. And that was before we got there as researchers, so. And I didn't go back to the ethics committee for that, because I thought, well, that's in the principle of, helping people to understand what it is that we're doing. And it doesn't deviate from, like, the idea. And I do think really that, it's interesting what you're saying. Like, a lot, I mean, the research that we've been doing has been going on for about 7 years. Do you know what I mean? And, like, during that time, obviously things develop. And we have to understand that it's principles, don't we? And that doesn't that also relate to the idea of having some of the community members collect data, or not just collect data, be part of the research process as citizen scientists. I mean, one of our ethical principles there is that they are there right from the beginning as actual, as full members of the team. But then the principles of ethical research are then being like just communicated through through a team of people. And I think that if we stick to those principles, like because in fact, what's happened is that we just become more and more aware of of risks and responsibilities, to create safe environments for people to work with us, as you say. So that's like just doing more and more. And so if the ethics process like gets you to kind of think, well, what would be an ethical approach? And then you apply that in different circumstances. I think that that's, in line with what you're trying to do with, with submitting your ethics application and getting approved.
That's very true. Well, thank you so much on mentioning this. Actually, you have described something that really cross-cuts and many people working in the sort of qualitative research setting, in the sense that the setting, that context itself is quite an organic thing. It's a living thing. It evolves on an everyday basis, and that's just simply impossible to predict everything in advance and put them into 5-10 pages in a way. But what's really, I think, important, what I understand from your experiences, that is to keep the communication channels open, if I understood correctly, with your participants, with whoever involved, with your stakeholders in a way, and then provide further information, keeping the principles on the basis of the principles that you have already shared in advance, such as the principles of privacy, safety, for instance, and then like on the everyday basis, deal with the issues on the basis of the context, but again, providing that information and then relying on the rapport that you have created, the relationship that you have created in time with the participants. I think that's really, really important. Thank you very much, Eileen, on that. So one final question, just, if there is anything else that you would like to share with the people who are working on the intersections of education and mobility, refugee context, and technology. Are there anything else that you would like to share before we end our conversation today?
I think that the thing is that you have to be quite inventive in these kind of contexts, and I mean, and like it's interesting that when we started thinking about like sort of digital, the sort of privacy in terms of digital data and things like that. I mean, all of these things pertain to that kind of field, and I think that when you're getting ethical approval, it's quite a kind of tick box kind of thing. Sort of like, yes, we'll obey the rules of the platform. Yes, we'll anonymize everything. But it's actually, when it comes down to it, it's really complicated because actually different platforms have different rules, and sometimes you can't quote participants because they say that the IP belongs to those people, even though they might want you to. They might want to like have their ideas shared, and they might want to be acknowledged for them. So it's sort of in a sense, it's almost like where it's just not straightforward anymore, and I think it would be good if our ethics processes kind of acknowledged that things are not quite so straightforward as they sort of appear when you're submitting your your ethics application and filling in your different forms, that you might actually have to sort of judge things as they appear to you, and on an ongoing basis, and I don't know what the answer to that is, because of course people will say, well, we can't give ethical approval for something that we don't know about. So that, but I suppose that the thing is that you can say that you will work within a code of conduct, and you'll interpret different situations according to that.
That's very true. Well, thank you so much, Eileen, for sharing your insights, all your time today, and joining us in this research ethics conversation series. Among many tips that you have shared, I think what I will take as a takeaway from the conversation is that things are not really straightforward in the qualitative research setting. So one needs to be really prepared for that. and expect unexpected in a way, and then be flexible, be inventive, as you've mentioned, but also keep the principles like in the right way, and then just refer back to the ethical the sort of code of conduct, but still know that things that you foresee might be different and might evolve in time. Thank you very much for your time again, for being with us, and thanks everyone for watching this episode of Research Ethics Conversations, and hope to see you in the next episode. Thanks, Eileen.
Thank you.